Good. Welcome, everyone. Sorry for starting a few minutes late, but thank you all for joining. My name is Robert Bennett. I'm a technical specialist here with NARUC's Center for Partnerships and Innovation. And today's webinar will focus on electric school buses. This has been a topic that has been of interest to our members for a long time, and electric school buses are gaining momentum across the country to help reduce air pollution and decarbonize transit. Utilities have an important role to play in the connection and charging of electric school buses. And today we'll hear more about how this rollout is going and more about the role of the regulator in this process. Before we get started, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, talk a little bit about NARUC, as well as a presentation today. Jessica, if you could advance to the next slide. Today's meeting webinar will be recorded and posted online. We will share the link to that after this presentation. But just to speak a little bit about NARUC, if you're not familiar, we are the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. We're a nonprofit dedicated to representing state public service commissions who regulate utilities that provide services such as energy, power, water, and transportation. NARUC's members include all 50 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, and U.S. territories. And our mission is to serve the public interest by improving the quality and effectiveness of public utility regulation. And if you go to the next slide. And I want to talk about the Center for Partnerships and Innovation, where I work. We focus on building relationships, developing resources, and training to state commissions that connect them to complex and current and emerging issues. CPI is funded by a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Commerce. NARUC CPI focuses its work on 5 key energy areas or topics, including generation, transmission, distribution, customer programs, critical infrastructure preparedness, response, and resilience. And if you're interested in learning more about our work, you can visit the website down below here. If you go to the next slide. I won't spend too much time on these events, but just to make everyone aware, we have various virtual events such as this one, and we also have other in-person events and training opportunities. These are just some of them that are coming up for the end of April, May, and throughout June here. So please get in touch with us if you're interested in participating in some of these opportunities. You can also find more information on these at our website. Then lastly, to get things started here today, we're really excited to talk about this topic. I will introduce our moderator, Commissioner Lewis from the Louisiana Public Service Commission. Commissioner Lewis was elected in 2022 to serve the Public Service Commission's 3rd District, which represents constituents from 10 Louisiana counties, including Baton Rouge and the New Orleans metropolitan area. And I will now turn it over to him to introduce himself and introduce our panelists. Commissioner Lewis, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Robert, and thank you everyone for joining us today on this great discussion about electric school buses and how we are seeing this innovation and partnership really get geared into our communities. I'm honored to be part of NARUC's EV working group of commissioners thinking about EVs from residential use, commercial use, governmental use, and of course here now in heavy fleets such as school buses. And we have an esteemed panel that I want to get straight to hear their thoughts and then talk to them about. So I'm just going to quickly introduce them. First, we have Jacob. Jacob is the program manager of Plug-in North Carolina, Advanced Energy statewide electric vehicle program. Since joining Advanced Energy in 2018, Jacob has led numerous electric vehicle initiatives in a variety of areas, including residential, multifamily, and workplace charging. The next person we will have on our panel is Sue. Sue serves as the director of the Electric School Bus Initiative at the World Resources Institute, which aims to make healthier and more equitable electric mobility the new normal for an entire generation by electrifying the entire U.S. fleet of 480,000 school buses. That includes working with school districts, transportation providers, equity organizations, utilities, manufacturers, financing entities, communities, and policymakers on developing solutions across the ecosystem. Sue also supports additional work on transportation electrification. Our next panelist will be Carolina. She is the coalition manager for the Alliance of Electric School Buses. She has over a decade, of experience in community outreach and education, community organizing, communications, and strategy and program management. For the last 6 years, she has worked as a consultant within the environmental fields on campaigns for clean energy, land protection, and climate action, with a focus on elevating marginalized voices. Since 2017, she has worked on the Clean Buses for Healthy Needles campaign for a Latinx organization program by the League of Conservation Voters, pushing to prioritize Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and communities of color in the transition to clean rides for kids. And finally, our last panelist is Eve. Eve is the Senior Transportation Electrification Portfolio Specialist for Portland's General Electric, where she plans strategic development of innovation, transportation, electrification programs across Oregon. To pave the way for more electric cars on the road, she focuses on equitable deployment of infrastructure. She also administers PG&E's Oregon Clean Fuel Program portfolio, which funds community-driven electric transportation projects. So I want to welcome all of our panelists to this great conversation today. And so I think I would start this conversation with each panelist taking just a few moments to talk about why you believe electric school buses are extremely important for our communities to focus on. So let's start with you, Jacob.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Lewis, and thanks everyone for having me. Excited to join this afternoon. I think when we consider what it means to electrify a school bus fleet, when I think about this, I really think about across the country, our school bus system is really one of the most successful public transit systems that we have in the country. I think when we think across the entire country, we don't have many opportunities to really, we've certainly got strengths regionally, but I don't think we've got such a comprehensive deployment of mass scale public transit at the level of our school bus system. Of course, we're very familiar with the level of air pollution that those diesel engines emit. And we also see a use case that makes them really, really advantageous for electrifying. They run a route that returns to a charging depot or a school at the end of every run. They've got a lot of time in the middle of the day and overnight to recharge. And so it's a situation that's got, again, kind of a centralized use case and has the air quality benefits that we certainly would hope to achieve in decarbonizing our transportation sector.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue.
Sure. Thanks. And thanks, Commissioner. Great to be with everybody today. I'm going to go with a one-word answer and explain. We're doing it for the kids. There's 20 million kids that ride school buses every day, and that's super important for them to get to school safely, ready to learn. I was just doing a little take your kid to work sort of lunch and learn, if you will, around electric school buses. They understand this. They understand that school buses are polluting, at least most of them are, and there's a really great cleaner option out there that is also a lot quieter and really important for their health, for the health of communities. and the drivers as well. So, really excited to be able to talk more about this and how to get more of these electric school buses on the road as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's go to Eve.
Hey there. All right, I'll jump right in. And it's Eva with it.
Oh,
No problem. My corny joke is Evie, like Eva, like but I'll build certainly completely agree with what my other panelists here have already mentioned. So I'll just plug that I think this is really critical because we have an opportunity not just to recreate the current transportation system that we have today, but to imagine new possibilities that are only available via electrification. And I'm specifically talking about the flexibility of school bus load. I'll get into this later in the presentation. I think it's really important, though, as we have that discussion, we have to remember that these are, school buses first and have to serve that primary need of safely transporting our students every day. But it's really critical that we start to engage with districts now because that future possibility of flexibility is only possible if we build that foundation today. And part of that foundation is the trust and relationships with our districts so that they know we can be a partner in getting those kids to school safely every day and potentially, find some cost savings for them to be able to focus those resources in other ways across their district. So critical to be a part of that conversation and support starting today and not waiting for it to happen on their own.
Thank you so much. And finally, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And also, we're really grateful to be here with all of you. I think for us, echo everything that other folks have already said. The predictable charging schedule makes them great for the use case. Diesel is deadly for children. It impairs their ability to do well in school, to actually make it to school. There have been studies that have shown that retrofitting diesel buses can actually get more students to school. It's been shown to greatly impact their health, which obviously has a cumulative effect with so many other issues that children are already vulnerable to. And on top of that, you have climate. With electric school buses, you can reduce the life cycle emissions of diesel buses by half. So they're a huge benefit to the grid, to public health, to climate and sustainability policies. And I especially like what Eva said in terms of the cost savings that they can provide for school districts. We're seeing school districts that are saying, thanks to this, we can hire another teacher. And more importantly, we do need to make sure that we are transforming and reimagining what transportation can look like. School buses are the biggest form of public transportation in the country. And so the impact that we have here will be felt for generations.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much. And so now we are going to go into the presentation portion of this webinar from our panelists who will present some information to us, and then we will conclude with some questions that I have, but also as you were listening, if there are questions that develop as you're listening to their presentation, drop them in the chat and we will take those questions up. So we will go ahead and get that presentation started. And I believe, Sue, I think your slides are up first. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'll jump right in. Great to be with you again, as I said. Happy Earth Day week to everyone who's here. I am going to kick things off with kind of a state of the electric school bus overview and talk about what's going on right now. And then I'm gonna hand things off to one of our partners, Carolina, from the Alliance for Electric School Buses to dig into some more specific ideas, especially for utility regulators and utilities, folks working in the utility sector. And a lot of these ideas come from a new state policy playbook that we collaborated on. So I have three themes. It's hard to say, 3 themes. Momentum, money, and motivation. So I'm going to share a little bit more of the data that we've been collecting around that. Momentum is school buses are here and more are coming every day. The money is that there's a good amount of money out there in funding, and that's super critical, as I'll explain, definitely a role for additional funding to help support this transition, at least in these early days. And then motivation, there's lots of reasons, of course, that you've already heard about why these buses are so important to kids, a health, environment, how our states in particular are getting involved in motivating this transition. So if you go to the next slide, just a little bit about World Resources Institute. We are a global environmental group and work on the intersection of people, planet, and nature. About 3 years ago, we started our electric school bus initiative. Its mission and aim is to transform equitably the entire school bus fleet. That's about 500,000 school buses. I mentioned equitably, we'll talk about that a bit, but it's really about thinking about those kids and those communities that are most impacted by air pollution already, and bringing electric school buses to them and making sure that there's accessibility for all folks. I'm not sure if they were able to join this webinar, but some of my colleagues that work alongside me, particularly in the utility space, are Greg Kresge and Bobby Stafford. So I want to thank them for their work here. We have a utility working group that meets quarterly and confers in between all of that. We also have on our advisory council Commissioner Alessandra Carrion from Michigan, who brings to us her specific expertise, but certainly that insight into NARUC and the regulatory world, and a number of other electric utility stakeholders that are part of that as well. So we definitely are glad to have that participation. So what about electric school buses? Where are we now? The next slide kind of gives you a snapshot of this. As of really today, we update this monthly. We have a good number of school buses on the road and coming soon. What you'll see here is that we've got close to 9,000 committed electric school buses. What that means is that they've been awarded some fundings, they're ordered, or they're delivered or actually on the road today. And what's really exciting is that those are in 49 states, DC, 4 territories, and several tribal nations as well. So we're seeing some great momentum to that one theme in getting buses on the road. Next slide just drills down a little bit into the ones that are on the road. We've got nearly 1% of the fleet of those 480,000 vehicles operating on the road today. And you can kind of see the big surge there in the last couple of years. So super exciting to see this momentum. The next slide is, one of the reasons that there's been this momentum is that there's incredible amount of new public funding in place for electric school buses. Big portion of this is federal, the Clean School Bus Program, as well as a recent program that was just launched yesterday, the day before yesterday. It was just yesterday on clean heavy duty vehicles that supports electric school buses as well. Really critical to have that, as well as the state funding that's out there, and utility programs, make ready programs, other support that's out there. There's a whole host of ways that school districts and operators can help support this transition. And the reason that that's so important is that while there are thousands of dollars in savings, operational fuel savings, with every electric school bus, they still need a little bit of a boost to get them to what we call total cost of ownership parity. So we need that little extra boost up front to have them be competitive with the replacement cost and the lifetime cost, I should say, of their diesel equivalent. So really critical to have this funding in place to get things started. And then as we get to scale, those prices will be coming down so that we can, move into other stages. So that's the money part. And then the next part is really about motivation. Lots of reasons why electric school buses are really part of our future and moving towards that. And one thing that states have done to help recognize that is start to put in place zero-emission fleet transition targets. So you see here's a little bit of a map and some of the the writing off to the right around where those things are happening. If you look at a combination of states that have enacted legislation to bring electric school buses into their fleets and combine that with those that are participating in what's known as the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which also covers school buses, you've got about 30% of the fleet and 40% of school bus riders that are covered by those transition requirements. So that's super exciting that that's already in place and that's coming. It's going to be coming, of course, over a number of years. But one of our messages is that let's start planning for this now, in particular when we're thinking about the grid and thinking about what we need to do with infrastructure. We know this is coming, like it's right here. And let's start planning now because we know how long it takes to get some of those things in place. So last couple of slides are just a quick run through that I wanted to do on how we've put together a whole lot of resources to help school districts, operators, advocates, just folks, anybody working in this space, learn more about electric school buses and think about how to build them into their fleet. So you just see some snapshots here of some of the many resources we've put together. We have a buyer's guide that's really popular around what are the models that are out there? You know, what can I expect in terms of range? One thing that's not on here that I'll just mention, and I'll try to drop it into the chat. We have a new 8 tips for common electric school bus charging challenges. And this looks at things like right-sizing your chargers. Like, let's get the right level of charging in place so that you're not overtaxing the grid. If you don't need those heavy, the DC fast chargers, you know, or need as many as you might think, that's going to really help you move into an electric fleet a lot, you know, a lot easier, a lot faster, and a lot with a lot less funding. So I'll put that in the chat and folks can look at that. The next slide, just snapshots, 2 super popular things. Speaking of cost, a calculator that helps fleets look at what is that total cost of ownership and kind of gives a chance to play around with what the different data inputs would look like. And then we do maintain a clearinghouse on all the funding and financing opportunities that are out there federally and at the state level. And then finally, I couldn't resist saying a few words about, will my electric school bus work in the cold weather? So we've put together a new resource on that as well. If you go to the next slide, I'm just going to give like the very quick, before I'm going to do that. Sorry, I do have some slides on the cold weather. Yeah, if you go to the next slide, this is great. Our data dashboard. This is where I pulled a lot of that data from. We maintain that again on our electric school bus initiative.org website. Lots of great data about where electric school buses are and where the policy is. And then I did want to speak a little bit about the cold weather topic. We get this question a lot, but based on the research we've seen and all the conversations we've had, we know of successful operation in cold climates across North America with, you know, really good performance. That doesn't mean you don't have to think about operating in cold weather. There is going to be an impact to the battery range. And so it's a matter of really planning and thinking ahead around what that looks like. So a few tips that we've developed are on the next slide in terms of thinking about preconditioning, about storing buses. Can you charge in the middle of the day to kind of boost back up that battery charge? Certainly planning the routes. You know, don't start off with putting your new electric school bus on the most demanding route your first winter. You know, ease into that a bit. And a couple other things there as well, training really being important as well. So wanted to make sure folks knew of that resource. I know it's hard to think about cold weather right now as we move into spring and summer, but that is something that's definitely top of mind for school bus operators. So with that, love to hand things over to Carolina to say more about this and how utilities and utility regulators can help with this transition.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sue. And again, really great to have this opportunity to speak to folks that are key stakeholders in this transition to electric school buses. I'm here with the Alliance for Electric School Buses. We are a national coalition of not-for-profit organizations that all share the same goal to see an equitable transition of the nation's school bus fleet to electric models. For us, an equitable transition looks like prioritizing the communities that have been most harmed by transportation pollution, which are disproportionately low-income communities and communities of color, while ensuring that this is an opportunity to create great careers for U.S. workers. Next slide, please. We represent over 24 environmental, community, labor, and equity groups who work at the local and federal level, as well as throughout over nearly 40 states. Next slide. If you can do the next slide. Oh, sorry, I think we skipped one. Oh, maybe not, no worries. But we do have members throughout the country at over nearly 40 states, and that's growing as we see more momentum for electric school buses develop. We're here to serve as a resource hub for advocates to make sure that they have what they need to support this transition in their own communities. So switching gears now, just want to talk about electric school buses being an asset to the grid. Electric school buses, as Jacob mentioned earlier, they have a very predictable charging schedule, which means that they can help manage demand on the grid, especially if operators are using managed charging. Electric school buses can also provide vehicle-to-grid or vehicle-to-building services, which helps during peak demand or emergencies and can help make communities more resilient. We've seen this successfully happen in Beverly, Massachusetts, where the buses sent energy back to the grid during the summer, as well as in El Cajon, California, where the buses help keep the lights on during extreme heat waves. They could even be a potential revenue source, but this is obviously an area that is still in development. We're still exploring how to enable school districts and school bus fleet operators to take advantage of this. Next slide. So talking about the role that utilities play, utilities and regulators both play an incredibly important role in the deployment of electric school buses. They provide the electricity service, they help build the charging infrastructure, they service and connect to those charging stations. They advise fleet operators in many cases. They are also in charge of rate design, rate approval, and then cost recovery proposals, as well as vehicle to grid and resiliency initiatives. When it comes to electric school buses, one area that is new for utilities is in many cases doing education on electric school buses, and as well helping applicants for federal funding with their applications. Utilities, again, critical to this because infrastructure delays can impact the effectiveness of federal programs as well as state programs. How rates are structured can impact the expected cost savings that school districts may be anticipating, and cost recovery for incentives can also impact customer rates, which is an important conversation for communities to have across the country. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of our state policy playbook where we dive deeper into all of these recommendations that based on the work that we've been doing so far across the country, WRI and ourselves, we were able to put together a state policy playbook with our recommendations of lessons learned for what we've seen, what's worked, what hasn't. And here we have some of the major ways that utilities and regulators can support electric school buses. First and most important is including electric school buses in utility plans, whether that's a transportation electrification plan, an integrated resource plan, any kind of long-term plan. Electric school buses should be a part of the equation. We're also seeing many utilities and states develop NEVI plans as part of that federal funding program. Important for electric school buses to be a consideration and how they can fit into that as well. Make ready programs and incentives, absolutely necessary, as Sue said, in many cases, because not just to help speed up the technology, but because utilities have a lot to gain from these programs. But for any of these programs or incentives, we want to see that funding go towards the communities that have been most harmed by transportation pollution. And we recommend at least 50% and up to 100% dedicated to those communities. We also recommend, if possible, and there are ways that we can do this, and we're exploring case studies that show this, to recover those costs without raising rates on those who can least afford it. We also do have studies that show that make-ready programs can have a neutral to beneficial effect on rates, depending on how they're structured. Technical assistance and fleet advisory services. This is another key part, which I'll delve into a little bit later. Utilities, again, like we mentioned before, are also with regulators setting the rates that school districts and fleet operators will be charged. Having equitable and fair rates is really important to this transition. Particularly, we're looking at how we can incentivize time of use rates. And on the flip side of that, how we can maybe pause demand charges that in some cases are creating exorbitant costs for school districts that are deploying technology and usually, at least in that first year or two, are getting a handle of brand new technology and are kind of going through, you know, that curve, those best practices, lessons learned, bumps on the road. How we can essentially look at delaying those demand charges until they really get a hold of how to run their fleet most efficiently. For any equitable program, whether that's at the utility level or as part of the regulatory commissions, we want to ensure that there's community engagement that is culturally and linguistically appropriate to their communities, because communities are a critical piece of this equation as well, and we want to see them involved, and they want to be involved. That's what we're seeing across the country. And then lastly, there's obviously an important role for utilities and regulators in the grid services that electric school buses can provide and who they benefit. And so again, these topics are covered in much more depth in the state policy playbook that we developed with WRI, which I will try to put in the chat so that folks can see and download, but we go into much greater detail for each one of these sections. Next slide. I also want to call out that as we're seeing great federal funding, and again, Sue mentioned we have the EPA Clean School Bus Program, there's now the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle Program. We're seeing billions of dollars of funding go out the door for medium and heavy duty vehicles, and up to, at this point, 5 billion definitely for electric school buses. We're also seeing some gaps and some challenges. And one of these is that school bus fleet operators, oh, I'm sorry, can we go back a slide? I think we're ahead. Yeah, back one more. There we go. Thank you. Apologies about that. One of the challenges that we're seeing is that in some cases, you are having school districts that are struggling to connect with their communities, with their utilities in time to submit their applications to the EPA or to others. So we need to speed up the conversation between the utilities and the fleet operators. We're seeing some movement on this. EEI in particular has partnered with EPA to help connect school districts with their utility. We also have EPA, they've created a form specifically so that school districts can attest as part of their funding applications that they have connected with their utility and that the utility is aware that they're applying for this funding, which is very, very important. And then we also have a resource that EPA has developed coordinating with electric utility partners that's specific to applicants, but it's something that anyone can access. And these are all great starts, but unfortunately, I think we need a little bit more. So next slide. One thing that we've been hearing from school districts is the need to really set up fleet advisory solutions so that they can get help before they're applying for grants. And so this could look like utilities establishing teams to handle these new customers. It could also look like utilities proactively working on fleet electrification plans with fleet operators. And again, like you mentioned, this is a really critical place where we can ensure that we're right-sizing charging. Next slide, please. The other challenge is that we're seeing some delays in infrastructure build-up. And so we need strategic investments now to make sure that the infrastructure is ready when electric school buses are delivered. Next slide, please. One way to do this, again, is fleet advisory services, but also long-term planning to ensure that we are prioritizing infrastructure build-out where we know electric school buses are already committed. So like Sue mentioned, this could be places under ACT, Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, states with transition requirements, or where school districts have already committed to electric school buses, essentially making no regrets investments. Ideally, all utilities would provide fleet advisory services, which we know is a tall order, but especially for those that have make-ready programs, this would be incredibly beneficial for school districts that need more support to plan their full transition. Next slide. Just wanted to share that there's never been a better time to invest in a clean ride for kids, and that the investments that we make now can mean success for students in the future. And that, more importantly, strategic planning can help ensure that the grid is ready to manage new loads and provide reliable and affordable service for all customers. So with that, I'll pass it over to our other panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jacob, I believe you are next up. So let's hear from you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, good afternoon again, everyone. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. I want to bring a pretty local perspective. I think that Sue and Carolina did such a good job kind of setting the national stage and a lot of the challenges and opportunities that exist across the space, across the country right now. Want to bring kind of a hyper-local example in North Carolina in terms of what we're seeing across a small-ish scale of deployments currently as we prepare for, again, the deployment and the arrival of many, many more electric school buses. Next slide, please. So first off, some folks in the audience might be wondering who we are. We were actually formed by a Public Utilities Commission of North Carolina back in 1980. So I won't spend too much time with this, but just want to give folks an understanding that we're a nonprofit formed by a Public Utilities Commission, basically with the goal of advancing technologies that support the deployment and the adoption of renewables, clean energy, and energy efficiency across a number of different sectors. We've actually, as you'll see on the next slide, been working in the electric transportation space for quite some time. We've got a couple pictures here. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we've actually, we electrified a few Pontiac Fieros back in the day, and also a couple different electric vans as well. We did some very early work in plug-in hybrid school bus options and research in the mid-2000s, where we were working with a number of different partners as part of a federal grant. In some cases, we saw at that time that there were obviously challenges and really cost, prohibitors that really kept us from being able to implement at that time more wide-scale adoption of electric school buses. However, much of that research did lead to hybrid drivetrains, and then of course now we're seeing kind of the time being really right for electric school buses. Next slide. So really just to talk through how we relate to this topic. Again, we're not a utility. We don't put any infrastructure in the ground when it comes to electric transportation, but we're really here to work with utilities and the programs that they are designing and rolling out, and really helping to bridge those solutions and opportunities with end-use customers, whether they are, again, commercial industrial operators, residential customers with an energy bill, or in this case, electric school bus operators, school districts, fleet managers, different audiences like that. So we really want to do two different things really well. We want to share really good stories about what's happening across the state, really distribute information when it comes to charging infrastructure needs, typical resource planning, charging schedules, answering simple questions, debunking myths. And then we also want to provide technical support, whether it's infrastructure planning, as Sue and Carolina mentioned, right-sizing equipment, establishing utility-based program research and evaluation, and leading up to vehicle-to-grid research, test plan design, and field implementation as well. Next slide. So I really just want to give an idea of kind of where we are in North Carolina right now. We have currently less than 25 electric school buses on the ground across the state, by all counts that we can really track. Obviously, that just really indicates that these are very, very early days, but the time is now. We've seen many in the order of hundreds of electric school buses on order in North Carolina. So within the next 12 months, we can anticipate about a 4x growth in deployment of electric school buses across the state. We have about 15,000 school buses here in North Carolina. So we've got an idea here of kind of where we are in this process. And really, we just need to emphasize there's a ton to learn right now based on these early observations that are helping us prepare for this next wave that's going to be quite a bit bigger, through programs like the EPA's Clean School Bus Program. We've had a couple of really effective VW settlement programs that support school bus electrification opportunities that have been awarded. And Duke Energy actually has a a pretty notable pilot program going on right now that does include school bus electrification. So, we've got a lot to prepare right now, a lot to learn from, and then we really need to step into this next phase with a good idea of how we're going to prepare to scale in the order of thousands moving forward. And so this is a very, very critical time for us to learn not just how to get these electric school buses on the ground through all of the different funding mechanisms that we have, but what does the charging ecosystem look like? What are the policies and procurement plans that are in place that actually help customers select the right charging equipment for them, whether it's through some of those fleet advisory service that Carolina mentioned, or some other platforms to really have the right lessons learned and really answer the right questions around how to best support and enable school systems to deploy these electric school buses effectively. And the last point I want to mention with this is we're really focused on how to integrate these programs with utilities, right? We certainly recognize the value from an environmental perspective and the role that they have in decarbonizing our transportation systems and providing a healthier opportunity for our children and drivers and our communities. But we also really need to think about, in order to get this to work at scale, we're going to have to integrate these into utility programs as best we can. And we really want to help, really iron out the wrinkles with that. Next slide. So I'll just kind of drop, I know that this is a pretty prescriptive slide here, but just want to share a few things that we're really seeing from the field. We're supporting electric school bus deployment in a couple different ways, including a vehicle to grid program evaluation. So these are just a few of the things that we've really seen that have been very, very relevant for some of those 25 electric school buses that we've seen across the state. Right now, these projects require a lot of partners. That's a really, really good thing. And we don't really think that there are too many cooks in the kitchen with that. But you do want to be really, really calculated and measured about how you engage with partners. You need to remember that these partners are going to be working with school districts, with fleet operators, with transportation directors, with drivers. And so we really want to make sure that they're representing the industry very well, to the degree where, the stories that are going to be shared from these earliest adopters are communicating this in a way that of course is going to be really productive and successful and positive. And on that note, we really need to remember the role of the educators in this. Of course, they're critical in this level of deployment, whether they're transportation directors, again, operating from maybe a public school system, what have you. We just have to remember the responsibility and the weight that's placed on them with these types of early adoption projects. They're the ones that are troubleshooting when things don't go well. They're the ones that are really have to be accountable for how these buses charge and how they run at the end of the day. So we have to make sure that we're still serving the purpose of, like, these are transportation devices first. We have to make sure that they're able to perform the necessary routes. And what we ask for when we engage with educators is mindful of the workload that it takes to, not only usher in these technologies, but how that's added on to what they're already doing. I was on a site a couple weeks ago running a vehicle to grid experiment, and the transportation director was also substituting an art class, right? And so they were actually coming out in the middle of the day to check on the progress of how this particular vehicle to grid demonstration was going. They were really excited to see it, but they had to jump back into the classroom. And so when we think about where these technologies are and making sure that these solutions are really, really market ready, they have to be very reliable. And we just have to make sure that we're not putting an undue burden on the educators as these early adopters with that. Buses obviously have enough capacity to meet necessary range requirement in almost every case that we're seeing. And so, here in North Carolina, we haven't seen many situations right now where especially inclement cold weather has been a problem. In all the school bus projects that I'm working on, we typically see buses arriving back at the school or at their place of charging above 50% state of charge. And so even so, there are some situations where drivers might have a little bit of range anxiety. In some cases, they've got buses that are running double routes. But what we've seen so far, and I think, of course, this is calculated based on making sure that the buses are deployed on the most effective routes. Right now, we're not seeing state of charge limitations at all. In addition to that, we are seeing that the vehicle to grid use case can pencil out. I'll say with a big caveat that I don't believe that the vehicle to grid application is necessarily the best application for every single electric school bus, but it does certainly have a role. One of the big things that we see with this is that buses are arriving with a high enough state of charge after, let's say, an afternoon route to support, any kind of summer events where we've got some peak scenarios immediately following when a bus arrives back from a run. So for example, let's say a bus has arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon. We're not going to be able to charge up that bus before we discharge, right? We actually have to use the available capacity in order to provide any grid services at that point. Those are the windows that we need to hit. So kind of relating to the previous point that these buses do have enough capacity to meet their range requirements, that's also going to be true in order to make that vehicle to grid use case pencil out. It's not the case in every scenario, but of course, in especially some of these kind of late spring, early summer kind of shoulder periods, whether it's April, May here in North Carolina, or August and September when school starts again after a summer session. If we did not have enough capacity as these buses are returning from an afternoon run, we would be much more limited in terms of what we could do with the vehicle to grid use case. And the most important bullet here is the last one, that what we're seeing in terms of this program design or kind of the original or initial rollout of these electric school buses is that managed charging is not happening yet. Obviously, this is going to be critically important. And what we really have to do with the 25 electric school buses that are in North Carolina in preparation for the many, many times more than that are going to be coming over the next year or two is really prepare both from a kind of a program implementer perspective and also those that are actually deploying these school buses in the field. We have to prepare for that managed charging use case. It is critically important. In some cases, we've got to make sure that we're actually building enough confidence with charging sessions. We have to make sure that school bus charging is on a reliability index that's much closer to like home charging, where you plug in your car at the end of the day and you know that you're going to have enough capacity, enough range to meet your daily driving needs the next morning. That's much more kind of closely aligned to what we need electric school buses to be, instead of like, let's say, a public DC fast charging scenario where maybe the reliability is not at the level that the drivers and consumers would expect. So we just have to be very, very good at making sure that we've got full confidence that the charging equipment and the bus telematics are really going to be able to handle the necessary communication to have reliable and successful charging sessions every single time. With that being said, we also need to make sure that we're engaging with the drivers to make sure that they're actually building up enough confidence in terms of operating these buses. With one particular school that I was on site with last week, I was asking of their 4 electric school buses, how the drivers feel, in terms of their confidence. And they shared that some of them have plenty of confidence as long as they're above 80%. But there was one particular driver who was like really, really focused on and hopeful that they would have 100% state of charge every single day when they would run the bus, because otherwise it did introduce quite a bit of range anxiety. Of course, that's not the end of the world, because we know that in that case, the bus is actually going to be able to meet its necessary route requirements. But it is going to be really important once we start to work with managed charging applications with more nuance. Maybe we don't have as much time to achieve 100% SOC. How can we make sure that we still have 100% confidence that the bus can meet those necessary driving requirements? And we need to understand the charging schedules and the unique needs, not just of a school, but of the specific buses. In which cases is a bus running a double route? One last slide that I'll just kind of jump to here. Next slide, please. Is basically what we need to do to make sure that we are prepared for managed charging applications. So again, this is basically our checklist to make sure that we do get a perfect score in preparation for managed charging and eventual V2G applications. Is the equipment properly sized and reliable? And do we have that flawless connectivity to the bus? If we schedule a managed charging session and that charging session is scheduled for overnight when there are no operators on site and that session fails, we have now lost confidence for a very, very long amount of time, and that simply can't happen. In addition to kind of preparing for this managed charging scenario, do you have the right software to track station usage and behavior? And do you also have a clear understanding of actually who is managing that program right now? Maybe it's not fully integrated into like a demand side management program at the utility level, but you still have to have good ownership in terms of like, how are we making sure that we're able to see the data that we need to see to make effective decisions? That sounds really simple, but that's a really complicated kind of problem to make sure that you're out in front of before you get to the point where you've got the infrastructure deployed, but you're not able to see those use cases of when the charging is happening, following schedules, and of course, scheduling charging sessions. Making sure that you've got that clear charging performance over time. And then also, when are you getting your reps, right? When are you practicing these managed charging scenarios at a time that's actually not going to be super costly to the operators if it doesn't go well? So in many cases, we want to make sure that we're getting those reps over the summer, over holidays, in scenarios where there might be operators on site, but there's not the consequence of a missed session leading to the operators having to go and get another bus that doesn't typically run. So these are just a few things that you want to make sure of. Next slide.
And Jacob, I hate to cut you off, but if you could wrap up soon, we need to give Ava some time for her slides.
No problem. Yeah, I'll just leave people with a couple different places where they can find and connect more. So you can find us on the website if these slides are showed. This some of our services are linked, and then with one more slide here, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. We have done a plug it and see case study with Randolph County Public Schools and Randolph Electric Membership Corporation, which is a cooperative here in North Carolina. Would really like to encourage folks to come check this out, where we've got all sorts of different facts on the bus, and have also produced a short video that highlights the value of running this electric school bus in the same county where it's manufactured. So thanks. Yeah, sorry for running a little bit over there.
No problem. No, thank you so much, Jacob. That was so great. And Eva, let's go to you. Just for those who are on the panel, we are going to go a little bit longer, just because we started a little bit late. So if you're still interested, like I am, please stick around. But we're going to continue this conversation. But we understand if you have to drop right at 3. But really looking forward to what you have to say, Eva. So take it away.
All right. Thank you so much. Yep, Eva Assessor of Portland General Electric. We can get straight into the next slide. And mine presentation is pretty short, so hopefully we can get right into those questions shortly. But for folks who are not familiar with us, Portland General Electric, based out of Portland, Oregon, often shortened to PGE, but we are a vertically integrated investor-owned utility. We serve about 2 million folks in that region across 51 cities, again, going down from Portland to the state's capital and out towards the coast, and then towards our Cascade Mountain Range. And we have some pretty ambitious emission reduction targets. So it's 80% decarbonization by 2030 and 100% by 2040. And to achieve that, we are seeking to serve a quarter of our load through distribution flexibility and a virtual power plant. And so electric transportation overall, and particularly electric school buses, are an important part of that. So next slide, please. All right, I want to talk to you about a program we have had for 5 years now. This is our 5th year of the Electric School Bus Fund. It is grant funding for the incremental cost of the electric school bus over the comparable gas or diesel, and initial funding for charging chargers and supporting Make Ready. To date, our Electric School Bus Fund has supported 50 electric school buses in Oregon. Of course, now we're seeing additional funding opportunities and additional electric school buses come through those external funding, both national as well as some state programs. But again, it's all a partnership, and we're excited to see that happen. I'll mention some of those, like eligible expenses are specifically reported to, or specifically related to the bus, and charging, as well as those upfront software and network fees. But the grant doesn't cover fuel costs or insurance costs, extended warranty, and then costs not directly related to the implementation of the electrification project. Sounds like cold weather is a theme here, and so that's why I always like to use this photo from a school district in Gresham, which is just east of Portland. It's a district that serves a lot of underserved communities when it comes to transportation electrification, a very high immigrant population. This was last year, a fun surprise springtime snowstorm ribbon cutting, but folks were still out there. And again, we've really seen this project and this program evolve over time. And we had those kind of early adopters, right? And over the past several years, we've tried to evolve and move beyond those early adopters, those districts that were more resourced to take that risk, and move to other districts. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. So how do we fund this program? It is not at all through ratepayer sources, actually. It is completely funded through our participation in the Oregon Clean Fuels Program, and that is a statewide low carbon fuel standard. It's administered by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. The really big picture is that it mandates a decrease in the carbon intensity of on-road transportation fuels, and PGE, or utilities, earn credits via a calculation that DEQ does on an annual basis of EVs at residential homes. And then we have to sell those credits, and the purchasers or importers of diesel and gasoline to the state of Oregon. So really the bottom line is more EVs on our roads overall means more clean fuels credits, and that has over time resulted in more revenue to fund these programs. We have to spend these funds to support transportation electrification in Oregon to the benefit of our residential customers, with a particular call outs and support for underserved communities. So next slide, where I will talk about lessons learned over 5 years of this program. And Jacob covered a lot of things that we really, really agree with and over time. But the first one is you need an internal champion at the district. Often it is the fleet manager or transportation director, but over time it can be a superintendent, it can be the school board or overall, or particular school board member. In one district, we've even seen it particularly be students pushing for this, and the fleet manager there was a bit reluctant, so they tried out just light duty EVs first, and through a different grant program that we run, and that helped them gain confidence to now they're starting to plan for full fleet electrification. The next thing that is really critical is technical assistance. So we've evolved every year this program and how we manage it. And so at the beginning, we didn't have any fleet technical services or a fleet group. So we did that through the staff that manages this grant. We now have a very extensive fleet make-ready program called Fleet Partner, and that has 2 phases. The first phase being plan, and then of course the build phase. But a lot of districts now who have gone through the Electric School Bus Fund and started their electrification journey that way have now gone through that program as well. But that's really critical. Like James, there's so many priorities that these districts have, and to be honest, transportation often ranks pretty low on that list, especially doing something new, challenging in that space. And so those champions who are really, our job is to make their job easier, right? To be a source they can call and ask questions. We often do site visits. And then if they go through that fleet partner program, like I said, they actually get a, digital and physical document that they can use in these conversations that help them look at those total cost of ownership costs upfront, the planning. WRI has great resources, and we also direct our both participants and potential participants there as well. And so those tools and support are really critical. And that doesn't mean, right, that these folks are going to be in these roles doing the support for the next 10 years. What we've really seen both through school districts and overall fleet is it takes 12 to 18 months for a fleet to go from, hey, I'm thinking about this, to I'm ready to move ahead with this. And that they just need resources to go to in that time. Flexibility is really critical. This space is rapidly evolving. Things are changing on the daily. We are learning who are those good partners and who are not. We are, again, federal and state funding and other funding sources are becoming available. And so programs need to be able to adjust relatively quickly to the demands of the market. And that is really critical. Otherwise, we are always a step behind and we're not meeting the needs, and we're never going to meet, get those buses out in the communities and with the kids who need them most, who do bear that much higher burden of pollution. So the last thing I mentioned this is we are really excited. We have demonstration projects, and we're moving ahead on both fleet managed charging and some V2X demonstrations. And when I'm talking about it internally and with industry folks, we all get really excited about that future of flexibility. And it's really important to keep in mind, these are buses first. Their primary role is to transport our students safely, and that always needs to be a priority in designing programs and incentives and in conversation, so we can really make this an asset for everyone and understand what folks are saying yes to, because no one wants to get that call of like, hey, we can't go on this bus route because the bus didn't charge. That just simply cannot happen. So with that, I will move us, I think, into the next phase. So there we go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva. And I want to thank all of our panelists, one, for such informational things to think about as we focus on electric school buses. I mean, I didn't say it in my background. I'm a commissioner, but I'm a former elementary school teacher. So this is really resonating with my old line of employment and my new line of employment of being a commissioner and a regulator. So I'm going to pause really quickly. I know we're a little over time to see if there's any burning questions from our audience for our panelists. And if not, I will conclude us with a general question that I think can resonate with those who have joined us. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat just yet, but if you have a question, really go ahead and drop it in the chat. But since I see none, I'm going to start with this. I'm a regulator. We have regulators and staffs of commissions on this webinar. So what is the first thing that we should do to help support electric school buses? And any of our panelists can start with that question.
I know it's a little bit hard to answer that uniformly, but I'll try to jump in. Thank you for the opening there. Because I think it does depend on where your particular jurisdiction is in the transition, but let's just assume most folks are kind of in early days. So I really think it's really important to open that conversation, be able to have whatever technical conferences might be helpful to get information flowing. I say that all while also saying like there's a need to move through the process, you know, in a timely fashion so that utilities that you're regulating can be prepared to be thinking about, do they have a make ready program in place? That maybe is like the first thing you want to think about, you know, engaging them on and moving towards. Are they out there with fleet advisory services? I think Carolina spoke to that well, and Eva can certainly talk about how that actually works in real life. Those are a couple of things that we've seen, you know, other commissions or commissions in general, you know, kind of put out there. We know that there are some commissions that have asked their utilities to do more specific school bus depot capacity mapping. So taking, you know, the more typical broader capacity mapping and just trying to at least understand, you know, the context there. You know, so I don't know, I guess I have three things that certainly can help, you know, can help support this.
Great. No, thank you. Anybody else want to chime in before we take maybe one more question from the audience or from myself?
I'll just say, this is not a wait around scenario. And in fact, if we wait around, at one of the questions I was talking about, oh, could this potentially even add load? Yes, and that is why it is critical to have programs and engage and be learning now, because it is coming, right? And so, and that might not feel like it's necessarily the case where folks are sitting now, but we are seeing it on the light duty side, right? And medium and heavy duty are following. Whether or not states have policies, folks are getting savings from these. They're safer. They're, again, First Student is a national fleet operator, and they are seeing nationally the buses specifically that are electric and running those routes, their incidents of you know, crashes and acceleration, which is the most common time for a accident to happen on a school bus, are much safer just because of the way an electric powertrain drives. So this is coming, and to just ignore it, we lose that opportunity to understand when that load is going to happen, how, and potentially for it again to be an asset. So from my perspective, you know, doing nothing is really ignoring, you know, managing the grid.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's extremely important. And so with the last few seconds that we had, I'll try to do a rapid fire question and just say, what type of opportunities are available for school districts on electric school vehicles, and how can us as regulators play a role in that technical assistance process? And anyone can take it, and we can make it the rapid fire kind of ending conversation. What can us regulators do to enhance and accelerate electric school buses in our states?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start, and I'll just say that the EPA Clean School Bus Program, again, is providing nearly $5 billion in funding. Half of that is already out the door. We're expecting another announcement any day now that will likely be up to $1 billion more of electric school buses. And so because of that, we are seeing school districts that are needing to connect with their utilities very quickly. And so one thing is checking with utilities. If you have dockets on federal implementation, on the Inflation Reduction Act or other federal funding, are they including the Clean School Bus Program? Because it's not something that utilities can apply for directly, but they can certainly provide that assistance to make sure that if a school district receives funding, they have, again, that good partnership with their utility so that they can deploy that funding quickly. Most of these funds have a 24-month to 36-month limit. And so you're working here on a very short timeline, especially if you're seeing some of the transformer delays or site capacity upgrades, et cetera. So federal funding dockets. Most states I know have established them because there are so many federal funding opportunities that utilities can take advantage of. This is one where they have a key role to play, but they may not be applying themselves. And so starting there and seeing if your utility, if you have a Make Ready program, how are they advertising that Make Ready program to school districts that are also applying for federal funding? So I would add that.
One of the great things about school buses is they're so tangible. You see them everywhere, you know what they are. And the ability to bring more sort of eyeballs to electric school buses, and as we like to say, like butts and seats, and sponsor things like ride and drives that can bring school districts and the community together to look and see and experience what an electric what a ride on an electric school bus is really like, is really powerful. And so we like to definitely encourage folks to try to think about what opportunities they have to sponsor those types of events and bring people together. It's just a great experiential learning. Like once you see it, then you start asking questions, and then that kind of goes from there. So great thing to do, and to partner with the utilities and other players in the space. So love the ride and drives or ride alongs. May not want people to be driving them, but yeah.
No, thank you so much, Sue. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining this webinar. I especially want to thank our panelists, Eva, Jacob, Carolina, and Sue, for your just wealth of knowledge and giving us a lot to think about and work on. I know one of my school districts in my district got a grant, so I'm ready to go. I'm not going to drive it, Sue. I'm going to ride along. So I'm looking forward to go and call them right now and do that. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Please stay in touch with NARUC. As you saw on the opening slide, so many other great webinars, in-person events coming. This was recorded. The slides are on the website. Share this with your colleagues, your fellow commissioners, and anyone. And let's get those electric school buses rolling all across the United States. I want to thank you all for joining us and look forward to seeing you in the near future. Take care, everyone.